So when I say mist, the first thing you might think of is sort of like the spooky kind of wet, transparent clouds that you would see hovering around a graveyard in a Scooby-Doo cartoon. But Blender approaches mist a bit differently. So basically mist in Blender is just sort of a fading effect, which can be used in conjunction with a smoke simulation or volumetrics, which we'll get into later, which would produce the actual sort of kind of floaty cloud kind of stuff. So in the same way, we can use camera tracking or depth of field effects by using the same menu options down here in our director's chair, whether we are in Blender Render or Cycles mode. We can do that for mist as well. So I'm going to go ahead and press 5 and duplicate this cube a bunch so we have an actual sort of background to be able to see the effects of the mist. And I'm just going to press B to do a border select and then press D to duplicate this, R to rotate it, and just kind of repeat that until I've got some generic background going on here. Okay, since we've got all these cubes as the background, I'll click on this front cube here, press Shift A, and under Mesh, add a monkey, S to scale, press W a few times to give it some smoothing, and delete that cube there, just so we have something to differentiate what we're focusing on with the background here. If we are in Blender Render mode and under Lights, we press Use Mist, then we will see the effects of this mist, which once again, this is actually just a sort of a fading effect. This isn't actually producing any sort of ethereal clouds or anything like that. So to see the effects of the mist in the big 3D view, you can change the viewport shading to material. And pretty much anything to do with shadows and mist and stuff like that, if Blender can display it at all in a live update and not either being render previewed or actually rendered, then it's going to need to be in material shading to see those effects. If we click back on the lights menu, we can actually move this over a little bit. And when we clicked use mist, we gained two new attributes, mist depth and mist range. So as you can see, as I decrease or increase this depth, this sets the boundary line for how far out the mist starts. And then if we adjust the range value, this basically controls the fade gradient of the mist between the marker of the distance that you set it away with the depth, if that makes any sort of sense. But just fool around with it a little bit, you'll sort of pick up what it's doing here. So if we were to then press my render button, we can immediately see the effects of this mist. So under lights here, if I press use mist to turn that off, to uncheck it, and press render, here's without the mist. And then if we click back on slot 1, there's with the mist. So that is Blender Render. If I press go back here, any effects that you add with this menu, if you're wanting to switch back and forth between Blender Render and Cycles and have them automatically convert for you, applying these effects is something that Sensei Format has to do specially to Blender. Blender doesn't do this on its own. Then you're going to want to use this menu to use Cycles. So in Cycles, if we press Use Mist, we're not going to be able to see a live update of those mist effects, because in Cycles, to create the mist effect, Sensei Format actually has to generate a node setup. Just know that you won't see the effects until you actually go to render. So if we click lights and press use mist, and then we press our render button here. So here we can see the effects of the mist in Cycles. So once again, as soon as we click use mist, we can control the depth and the range here. So if I were to increase this range quite a bit and increase this depth a bit and then render again, we've got a bit more subtlety in our mist effect here in Cycles. So if we switch between slot 3, which was our first Cycles render with the mist, and slot 4, which was the last one, we can see that subtlety added there, which is nice. And so what this is really fading into here is just the world background. And we haven't really discussed environments and world settings and such, but you can get to those by pressing this little blue world icon in your properties panel. So if we click on this and we click open preview to see what our background looks like. And here in Cycles, you're going to want to click surface to control the color, or if you're using some other effect or something for your background. And so if I were to change this to some kind of pale blue or something like this, and then we were to, with mist on, hit render. And so we see the blue lighting of the world background, but the background itself appears white. That's because I forgot, whenever you adjust your world background, if you're using mist in cycles, you're going to need to first disable it and then turn it back on. And then now if we press render, we get the full background integrated with the actual image there. And so the reason why, if you make adjustments to the world, that you're going to have to disable it and enable it back again in cycles to get it to work, is that once again, that Sensei Format is having to build an entire node setup for you rather than just have you have to manually go into the node editor, know all these things, and waste your time doing that. But we can switch this back to Blender Render if we click Use Cycles to uncheck that, and sends us back to Blender Render, and we can see those effects. We could, of course, change the world color here in Blender Render, and we could render this and see those nice effects of that mist going into the back there. Now, if we didn't want to render with the background at all, but for some reason, say we were creating an image where we wanted a transparent PNG of this fading, we can also, right here under Output Options, press Use Transparent, and then if we were to render this, we get the entire scene rendered with the mist fading, but with no background. And then so we could carry this over into another program or do some compositing here in Blender or what have you. So that's basically it. I hope you enjoy these features and get a lot of good use out of them.